Okay, so Multiversus Season 2 has come to pass and a lot has happened. From changes as small as new ways to unlock characters to sweeping overhauls to the combat system. Player First has put in a ton of work to improve the game, and that's why I found it so shocking to see so many video essays covering the downfall of the game. Honestly, most of these videos just sound like a broken record to me. Don't get me wrong, the player base is low, but after Season 1, the player base has been pretty consistent with plenty of potential to grow. And while not all the arguments about modern multiverses are outdated, many of the points addressed in these style of videos have been addressed in one way or another, or just flat out ignore critical evidence against their arguments. So, after watching enough of these videos, I decided to roll up my sleeves and talk about all the changes that have been quietly making the game better and better. So let's go ahead and dive into Season 2 in review. Before we look at what Season 2 changed, it's important to understand the pain points of Season 1. If you're familiar with Season 1 or Multiversus issues as a whole, I recommend skipping to this timestamp so we can get into the changes that Season 2 provided. Otherwise, buckle in, we got a lot to get through. While Multiversus Season 1 did great in numbers for the first little while, ended up becoming a laughingstock of a game with just how broken it was in pretty much every way. The most important issues, of course, lie in the core of Multiversus' updated gameplay direction. Generally speaking, the slowdown was strongly disliked by much of the existing community who came to enjoy the faster-paced gameplay from the beta. The speed drop likely had many more negative consequences than the devs anticipated. The lack of substantial differences between short hops and full hops, aerials halting your momentum, and the absence of landing lag animation suddenly felt a lot worse with the slowdown. This would often cause jumps to be much more committal and reactable due to the sheer amount of airtime you were forced into. Dodge cancels were also insanely expensive, to the point where you'd put yourself into burnout for attempting to approach with a burst option. Even if you were able to break the zone and open up a defensive player, the ledges were also extremely safe. Many characters' up airs are just blatantly better than their down airs, causing sharking from ledge to be near uncontestable without a substantial timing and positional read. All these factors ended up combining to create a game where jumping was punishable and it was preferable to stay grounded and whiff punish. However, potentially the largest oversight in this new gameplay direction was the strength of jabs. Jabs were your best combo starter, your fastest button for whiff punishing, and your safest move on whiff. Hell, some characters' jabs even had absurd range or disjoints with almost no commitment to balance it out. This led to dodging and jabs basically being the only thing you ever needed to do, to a comical degree in some cases.
Dude, what?
Many of the best characters in the game were either characters who had an absurdly good jab, like Joker or Iron Giant, or characters who had enough depth in their kit to deal with jabs, like Gizmo, Wonder Woman, or Steven. Not to mention that almost all the characters I mentioned also either had an infinite or a touch of death after landing a jab. While I do think that Season 1 Multiversus had a pretty definitive top 7 or so characters that inherently made the game unplayable for anyone who wasn't them, pretty much every character in Season 1 was either ridiculously buggy, broken in the balance department, or in Iron Giant's case, both. Characters had to be straight up removed from the game on 2 separate occasions just because how broken the game was on release. The gameplay and overall character balance led to many people's dissatisfaction as well as frustration with the game. But even outside of standard gameplay, there was plenty of issues to be had as well. For one, the game launched without ranked, which tanked a bunch of players' motivation to keep playing. Perhaps that was for the best though. Only because Season 1 was plagued with disconnects, SDs, and long load times that I'm sure would have frustrated many people in ranked. Even with no ranked mode though, many players believed that it was simply too difficult to obtain characters to hold their interest due to the time required to rack up fighter currency. There isn't like a character pass or bundles to buy more than one character at a time either. So if you wanted to buy every character in the game, it'd be somewhere in the ballpark of $200. Many other free-to-play games with unlockable characters have these options where you can pay anywhere from $30 to $60 or so and have every character that ever comes out. So obviously, over $200 for just the cast we had in Season 1 was out of the question. This isn't even considering the fact that until the end of Season 1, you couldn't even try characters out before you bought them in training mode. And if you didn't own them in Season 1, they weren't available at all in local play. The characters not being immediately available for local play was a huge hit to anyone who wanted to start up local tournaments or a grassroots scene for the game, simply because for every setup that you'd want to run on a local, you'd need someone's account who had every character unlocked. And many players just weren't comfortable with the idea of having to log into someone else's PC, or having to haul their entire PC setup to a local. While I do think that character prices and some skin pricings were the main gripe that a lot of people had, they also got a lot of flack for standard free-to-play tropes. Stuff like battle passes, limited time deals, or rotating shops, all that stuff. Most of the implementations I personally think were fine, with one big exception being how they handled the battle pass. First off, they would often direct people to claim their Season 1 Battle Pass, even if they didn't qualify for the promotion that made the first season Battle Pass free. Secondly, the first character of a season was and still has been locked behind the Battle Pass until the end of the season. And lastly, the game will still give you premium missions and notify you to complete them even if you're unable to. All these compound to make the game feel like it's continuously annoying you to spend money on it in a very slimy, roundabout way. And the last thing I want to cover before I move on to Season 2 is the PvE. Rifts were an interesting idea, but they ended up falling short, and also worked to send the message that the game was just trying to squeeze money out of their consumers. The core gameplay of the Rifts were okay for the most part, but most of the minigames ended up feeling really monotonous and not really satisfying to play, even on the hardest difficulties. But I also recognize that some of these minigames have the ability to create entire subgenres of the community if they're realized. I was very shocked to see that there wasn't a time attack leaderboard for target test or a PvP mode for the volleyball mode, and I feel like there's a lot of potential to flesh out those aspects of the game. The gimmicks in each of the matches were fun enough and usually kept me engaged enough to keep playing them from match to match, especially in higher difficulties. Though when it came to the hardest difficulties, the bosses ended up feeling more like solving a puzzle on how to gimmick them with your character or gems rather than beating them through standard gameplay. But the biggest issues with the Rift by far was the Agent Smith event, and the requirements for skins to complete some of the rifts. The Agent Smith event required you to beat every single boss in every single difficulty in every single rift if you wanted to unlock Agent Smith for free. This often led to you needing to replay each rift multiple times and needing to complete most all the challenges on each stage. Some of these challenges required you to have specific skins in order to complete them as well, and you'd need to do the challenges in order to get enough gem XP so that you could actually beat the bosses on their hardest difficulty. In all fairness, usually they'd allow you to use skins that you don't have for just that event if you weren't able to play the rift normally, but not always. It just ended up feeling like another layer of grime on a game that already felt like it was asking you for money every 5 minutes. To put it all together, Season 1 was a clown fiesta of a game that felt half-baked in its combat. It seemed to have much more interest in begging you for money than providing you with an actual engaging experience. The game dropped the ball on its launch, and it was unclear if they were willing to do what it takes to make the game reach its highest potential with Warner Brothers' greedy hands on the wheel. And this is the song and dance you'll hear from almost any YouTuber whenever they're talking about this game. Even to this day, I still see YouTubers publishing videos talking about these very same issues, implying that they haven't gotten any better. And while I do think that these are valid criticisms for Season 1, I do think that Season 2 has put in a lot of work to dig itself out of the hole that Season 1 put it into. So let's go ahead and get into some of the ways that Season 2 addressed the issues from Season 1. To start off, I'd like to talk about the online, since if you can't play the game, there's no point in talking about the gameplay. When Season 2 started, it ironed out most of the disconnection issues that plagued Season 1, although at the beginning of Season 2, it did drop with one huge issue. That being that when there was a lag spike, there was a good chance your character would just run off the stage. Thankfully, this was fixed in the mid-season patch. After that last issue was fixed, Multiversus Online became an unrivaled experience that consistently felt as close to local play as you could possibly get. But did the gameplay become good enough to make you actually want to play it? The game's defensive nature, limited options for movement, and over-centralizing options needed to be addressed if anyone was going to be interested in playing again. Jabs in particular were the most problematic part of Multiversus. So because of that, during the middle of Season 2, they introduced a priority system for jabs specifically. For those unaware of what that means, if the jabs were to come into contact with another attack, the jab's hitbox would be beaten out and completely run over by the stronger attack. With this, jabs could much more easily be contested and punished in neutral, opening the floodgates with new options for players to brawl with. This alone wouldn't be enough to prevent players from playing defensively though. The high cost of dodge cancels would still disincentivize aggressive gameplay and make burst options risky. So, Multiversus did the obvious thing and reduced the dodge meter cost for specifically dodge cancels with attacks. They kept the same cost of dodge jumps to prevent them from being an overly reliable option for escaping disadvantage. But wait, won't that make gameplay even more grounded? Actually, no. You see, a tech was found by Void, yes, that Void, where you could dodge diagonally into the ground and then cancel it with just about anything and still keep the momentum. Sort of like a toy dash from Melee, if you know what that is. I won't go into full detail about how it works. You can go ahead and check out Void's channel if you're curious. But the important part here is that you can cancel it with an attack or a jump to keep the momentum for no extra cost. This setup can lead to a variety of options. Baits, general movement, grounded burst options, and yes, even a pseudo aerial burst option. The update this was found, they actually buffed this tech substantially by allowing you to slide off of a platform for insane movement. But all of this wouldn't even matter if they didn't fix the issues of camping from ledge. After all, you can schmoove as much as you want up there, but it's not gonna do much if I'm down here. Well, guess what? They addressed that too. Now, while I definitely won't say it was fixed in Season 2, there's still a few too many instances where you can stay on ledge for a lot longer than you should probably be able to. They reduced the amount of time you could be touching the ledge from a whopping 8.5 seconds to 5 seconds before entering the wall fatigue state. You also will enter the wall fatigue state after touching the wall 8 separate times, down from 12, and you'll start sliding down much faster after only touching it 2 separate times. While the ability to float in the air for a prolonged period of time using aerials still allows players to stall at the ledge much longer than I'd like, these changes to the ledges were undoubtedly a step in the right direction. These combat changes went a long way into incentivizing players to diversify their game plan. But there was still an issue regarding character balance and advantage state. There were so many infinite loops and touch of deaths in the game, regardless of what character you chose. And many of these loops revolved around utilizing ground bounces to extend combos to an unreasonable degree. So to address this issue in Season 2, they also introduced a teching system during the mid-season. It works by forcing an automatic tech chase when hitting the ground if someone has already bounced off terrain once before. There is no wall or ceiling teching though, so you'll only be able to tech on the ground. Teching specifically on the ground after 2 or more terrain bounces may sound very specific and confusing to some, and by no means is it a perfect or even intuitive solution. But I believe that it's helped push the game in a much healthier direction. By still allowing single ground bounces for extensions, it allows players to still be creative with their combos while preventing over-the-top loops. With this change, it ended up making character combos and advantage states much more engaging and balanced throughout the cast. But characters themselves also ended up getting fine-tuned with balance changes. I can say with 100% confidence that aside from 2 or 3 characters, the entire cast is about the same power level. The top characters from Season 1 are still viable, they just no longer have the same chokehold on the game's meta that they used to. The strong characters were nerfed to a reasonable degree, and almost all of the weaker characters were buffed in interesting ways. For example, Velma, debatably the weakest character in Season 1, got an entirely new combo starting move on her cooldown variation of her down special. Even the nerfs ended up being really interesting and impactful as well. Black Adam, a consistently strong character throughout much of the first season, ended up getting his weight nerfed. And while you may not think that's much of a nerf at all when you're getting steamrolled by aerial down special, clap, and his insane juggles, one of the biggest strengths of Black Adam's was just how slippery he was. Most of the time, he could completely escape or avoid dangerous situations with his specials or demand space with his bigger hitboxes. This was especially aggravating since he was also one of the heaviest characters in the game, meaning you'd have to go through the struggle of pinning him down several times before you could close the stock. With the weight nerf, Black Adam became much more manageable, while still keeping much of the strength that might entice players to pick him up. Each patch over the course of Season 2 consistently made the game better and better. There's only 3 characters that I can see being argued as problematic after all the changes so far, and those characters are Wonder Woman, Iron Giant, and Jake. Wonder Woman is a weird case when calling her a problem though. On paper, she's not doing anything crazy to steal games, and she's not exactly over-the-top oppressive either. She's just stronger than average in pretty much every field possible. She has some of the most consistent answers to pretty much every option in the game. Her hitboxes are disjointed and solid, often just beating out less privileged ones. And her combo game, as well as kill power, is also strong. She's flown under the radar from patch to patch just because she's not inherently overbearing or absurd in her design, but while she flies under the radar of the dev team, the competitive community was very quick to notice that her consistency across the board made her an overly dominant pick. Ever since the game fully released, there hasn't been a single large-scale tournament that she hasn't top-8'd, for both 1s and 2s. Most of the time, she'll even be half or sometimes even more of the top 8 representation for these tournaments too, even to this very day. So while she doesn't feel over the top, the results don't lie, and unfortunately Season 2 hasn't done anything to address her competitive dominance. Iron Giant, on the other hand, was a very obvious problem since the start of Season 1. And while it's not nearly as bad as it was back then when he had to be removed from the game for having multiple infinites and game-breaking touch of deaths, he still has a problematic reputation with tournament participants due to his strength and dominance against much of the meta. He gets shut down really hard by some niche character picks like Marvin, Rick, or Raindog, but his win rate doesn't lie. He's currently sitting at 57% in 1s and 2s at the time of writing, with roughly a 2% pick rate. Unlike Wonder Woman though, Iron Giant has been nerfed almost every single patch possible, so it's not like Player First hasn't been trying to address the character in Season 2. He's just a little overbearing in the right hands and could likely use a few more adjustments before he's not considered a problem. On the flip side though, Jake has been a problem character on the opposite side of the tier list. Pretty much all of his kit felt weak with the exception of Bite. Bite ended up breaking armor, giving him combos, setting up for kills, and even gave him and his ally armor for a long time. The move effectively became the only thing Jake's would do just because it was that strong and the rest of his kit was pretty buns. Unfortunately for Jake though, his Bite was hit hard with nerfs, and throughout Season 2, he'd received no meaningful compensation to make up for him losing his strongest move. Like I said before though, Wonder Woman, Iron Giant, and Jake were really the only problematic characters balance-wise in Season 2. I'd say that 3 out of 31 is a pretty good track record going forward, especially considering that only 7 out of the 29 characters from Season 1 felt playable back then. It's important to note that while a ton of the game's issues were addressed, there are still a few major issues with standard gameplay that makes it unappealing to some players. The complaint of a lack of a true short hop, many aerials still causing you to halt your momentum, and the lack of landing lag still makes the game feel very floaty and slow to many people. And while being floaty and slow aren't necessarily bad things, it is the #1 reason I've heard so far why people have dropped the game. Considering everything though, standard gameplay has been improved significantly throughout the season. And while the gameplay still could use a little work, Multiversus did add new ways to play with the addition of a ranked mode in Season 2. Ranked mode was a bit of a mess on launch, so much so that I ended up making a video about it if you're interested in checking that out. But the basic gist is that it was more about how much you were willing to play rather than how skilled you actually were. Arguably, a lot of games rank can feel like this at the highest levels, but it was especially prominent in Multiversus. And while this may seem like a flop on Season 2's part, they did fine-tune a lot of the aspects of ranked mode to make it less grindy and more of an indicator of skill through small matchmaking and rank point adjustments throughout the season. I will say though, I do think the adjustments came in a little too late to matter for Season 2's rankings, but it does put future seasons in a much better position going forward. Now, for some people, the gameplay was never their biggest issue with the game. Their biggest issue was just how greedy and slimy the game ended up feeling. The presence of frequent free events with high value rewards ended up helping out with this a little bit, but Multiversus still found ways to drop the ball in Season 2. A big gripe that a lot of players ended up having with the game was just how hard it was to unlock characters. There was a tweet from Waidu that ended up getting a lot of traction in the scene. It detailed that based on fighter currency you get from Toast, unlocking a single character would take 38 hours. Now, I should clarify that this was a huge overstatement that neglected to mention literally every other way to gain fighter currency. But the sentiment of it taking too long to unlock characters resonated with a lot of people. Multiversus hosted frequent events that gave you tokens that you could use to redeem on skins, Gleamium, and yes, even fighter currency or unlocking characters straight up. This made getting characters way easier. And while this still didn't make it reasonable for TOs to host events with multiple setups, Season 2 brought a fix for that too. The end of Season 1 introduced the ability to try out characters you don't own in training mode. But in Season 2, you also have all characters unlocked in local play. The changes that they made for character affordability and availability have been huge wins for the season and the community as a whole. So much so that Multiversus announced their very first sponsored in-person event in Las Vegas as they head into Season 3. I'd be lying if I said they dropped all of their greedy habits though. The first character of the season is still locked behind the battle pass until the next season, and the premium missions will still nag you to buy the battle pass if you haven't. Some of the events even gave you missions that were impossible to complete unless you paid the money for the exclusive skins. You could technically clear the missions with the Rick and Morty skins that were available with the event's currency, but if you didn't want those skins, getting them to complete the missions would result in a net negative in event tokens. But this pales in comparison to Multiversus' most underhanded tactic yet. As a lot of you probably know, Beetlejuice was announced as the last character of Season 2. When they dropped a release date, many players were expecting to just be able to use the fighter currency they saved up to get him on launch day. But when the day came, many players were shocked and disappointed to see that he was only available on launch day if you wanted to pay Multiversus extra, or had fighter tickets from the Founders Pack from the beta. The character would then be available to purchase with fighter currency 3 days later. I cannot understate just how frustrating this was to a community who was expecting to be able to play him on the day he was set to launch. And while I don't agree with this tactic at all, I think the worst offense of all was the lack of communication that this was going to be the case until the day he dropped. I'm sure people would have been mad if he was just a paid exclusive for 3 days, sure, but only to find out on the day he was supposed to be released is an entirely new level of frustration. So while it still feels like Warner Brothers is the little devil on player first shoulder, they have gotten better about obtaining characters. It just sucks to feel like you're playing a game that has a vacuum position right next to your wallet in hopes that you'll open it at the slightest inconvenience that they push onto you. And while the rifts in Season 2 haven't improved at all in terms of trying to convince you to buy skins in order to complete missions, I will say though that the minigames have been refined to be much better than they were. They added a small adventure mode minigame where you needed to platform around and collect objects before racing to the finish, which feels nice. I said it before in the context portion, but I really wish there was a time attack leaderboard for target test and now this game mode to bring out some smaller speedrunning sub-communities. They also brought back the golf minigame from last season and fucking 2D Mario Kart, what? These are fine, they're fun enough, but still suffer from the same issues of the tank and cannon minigames where it doesn't really feel like I'm able to experience what I like about Multiversus. I will say, however, that the way that these stages are designed in an almost Mario Maker-esque fashion does raise the question of if players will ever be able to make their own stages for minigames like these. It could be a pretty neat feature to add, but I also understand if that puts more pressure on Multiversus to have a higher quality standard when it comes to making the rifts. As a consumer, I want to say, yes, please put more effort into making rifts. So long as it doesn't take resources from other areas of development, that is. But I can also empathize with the developers that just want the tool for themselves to make putting out content easier in a time where they're already pulling out their hair trying to fix the game. Aside from minigames, the gimmick matches and bosses were somewhat improved. The bosses in particular I had more of an enjoyable time fighting, but honestly that might just be because I didn't have to fight them all on loony difficulty. The gyms in general were made much more interesting to use and felt much more impactful when using them. The grinding for these gems, as well as the events for PvE, were also made much more reasonable. With the addition of new daily gem XP and shops, it became very easy to get your gems max level. I only really played each of the rifts once and had max gem level long before the end of the season just from logging in daily. For the events, you only needed to complete a rift and its missions when it came out in order to complete the event. The only issue is that the event progress was based off of how many of the challenges you were able to complete, some of which were locked behind specific character skins, which was pretty annoying to see. Even without the skins, you're still able to complete almost all the events, and some of the events would even give you currency to get the skins for free. The biggest setback for the PvE though is character requirements. Just because not owning a character could prevent you from completing a lot of the missions. With PvE tackled though, it's finally time to summarize Season 2. Season 2 has made leaps and bounds towards making the core gameplay experience so much better. It fixed its online, added ranked, and finally added more viable ways to play in a game that was starved of depth. While the monetization hasn't gotten much better, arguably worse after the Beetlejuice fiasco, the game has trended in a positive direction, and I'm eager to see the game continue to improve. It's clear to me that Player First is hearing the community's issues, and they're working on addressing the game's biggest problems. And while not all of them have been addressed as of yet, as I look into the horizon that is Season 3 as I write the script, it's clear to me that they have every intention of continuing to improve the game. And as the community is at its lowest point in terms of numbers, I think we're finally in a position where we can start to cultivate and grow a dedicated community. With Multiversus hosting their first in-person event and the fact that all characters are going to be available in local play, we can look forward to seeing more grassroots communities start to flourish. It's very common to see many influencers vent their frustrations about the game, and hey, I get it, the game can be aggravating. But at the same time, I don't see nearly enough people celebrate the huge improvements that have been gradually made to make the gameplay better and better. So I hope with this video, I've been able to showcase the brighter side of Multiversus and inspire others to share their own appreciation for what they love about the game. And with that, this has been Multiversus Season 2 Reviewed. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I'm sure you can tell, but I think Multiversus has a lot to love. And if you want to stay updated on Multiversus, or just hear the positive side of the argument for Multiversus, you should hit that subscribe button. I also stream on YouTube, as well as over at Twitch at twitch.tv/RPS_FGC. So pop in if you're wanting to chat and share your own thoughts about Multiversus. We'll likely be playing through Season 3 ranked this week, so stop by and say hi. But yeah, that's all I got for now. I'll see you guys in the next video.